Okay. Hello, folks, and welcome to 2020 TPAC festivities for the Web Performance Working Group. As always, the calls will be recorded and then posted online. And for this year, because the world has imploded, we are doing this online and split up into 4 days this week for 3 hours. They are packed with a bunch of super interesting proposals, and personally, I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, and the first lot is basically we're going to go over like some introductions, because I think we have some new folks who may want some background. But for that, yeah, Nick, do you want to?
Sure, I will kick it off a little bit. Obviously, everybody, welcome to TPAC this year. It's my first year as a co-chair for this, so I'm going to try to drive some of this, but fall back on Yov's excellent advice through parts of it. Let's see, so why don't we just start out with what the mission is. We're all here to think about and measure and improve performance of the web. The mission of this particular working group is to provide methods to observe and improve aspects of application performance of user agent features and APIs, which I think lays out what we're trying to do with all the different specs that we're working on pretty well. We've made a lot of progress this year. Certainly, I joined as one of the co-chairs. We recently pushed out HR time as level 2 recommendation. Safari recently added page timing to WebKit, which is fantastic. I noticed Yov, you added this crossed off one here as well for our goal of having a SPA-focused meeting in the middle. I think we were planning on doing that around maybe the Perf Matters conference back in the day before that was all canceled. I think we do have a couple discussions planned for this week around SPA related items. So I think we'll kind of continue some of that here. But yeah, other than that, we're just, every time we're working on, our conference calls and everything, we're working to close out issues and push specs forward and to further get adoption and everything. I'm not sure if that title at top 86 is correct still, but those are the number of issues that we've closed under each repo over the last year since our last TPAC. So that's a lot of great things that we've worked on. We do have a larger discussion planned, I think, on Wednesday as part of the rechartering of the group. Just as a heads up, our current charter for the WebPerf working group ended back in June. We did get an extension for it to December 31st of this year. We're going to be looking towards rechartering as a group. I think we all want to continue doing this. There is a draft that is linked in these slides as well. And we can post that into the chat if anybody wants to also look at that. There's some other topics to be discussed as part of that. We'll probably do that on Wednesday. Another thing is, I think as part of that discussion too, we're gonna be seeing if there are anybody wants to kind of pick up some of the specs that we have and potentially be an editor, co-editor on some of these. Some of the specs that we have had a good start, and they have a lot of things there already. There's some open issues, but there's not necessarily active editors working on them or trying to push them forward. So there is some opportunity here if anybody wants to take the lead for some of these, existing specs or kind of restructuring of existing specs as well. But we can probably talk about that a little bit more on Wednesday. As a group, we have a lot of incubations as well that we frequently discuss during the calls, things that we may or may not want to actually bring into the official charter at some point in the future. But this is a pretty big, hardy list. Lots of different measurement things here. a couple ways of active APIs for our web developers to use to make their sites faster. So there's some good options here that we may want to discuss further. I believe you've recently checked out these stats for Chrome, I'm assuming, and usage across the web for some of these APIs that we work on. We also have year-over-year increases or decreases as a percentage for some of them as well. So there's been a lot of uptake as far as all these, pretty much most of these APIs. Kind of interesting that Performance Observer and long task usage went down a little bit. Might be something interesting to look into there about why. I don't know if
if anyone has ideas regarding what may have been the cause for that, that would be highly appreciated. But but overall, we see most of the APIs are green and show significant uptake. And yes, this is the public stats from Chrome status.
Okay. And I was wondering if any of the other browser vendors here have any other interesting stats to share later during the week as well for any of the APIs that are implemented. We have a lot of new participation this year. Then I think that's been one of our greatest strengths, is getting a more diverse voice. So a lot of new companies and invited experts have been joining the calls and sharing the things that are important to them. Certainly, I think that's one of the best ways for us to grow, is to get more diversity in what people are using, what people's needs are, and everything like that. So thank you for everybody that's participating. Good old pat on the back, self high five. Thank you very much for everybody this year for doing what you can, for joining calls and just being part of the group. I think we're working on a lot of good things. We do have an agenda posted in a Google Doc. We are also taking, trying to scribe minutes at the end there. I think Yov and I will primarily try to do that this year, but if we for some reason happen to be both talking at once, if there's anybody else that wants to help with that, we may try to coerce somebody as well. But we will try to get the notes consistently throughout that in the same Google Doc. Yo, if you want to go over any of the housekeeping stuff?
Sure. So most of you are probably familiar with it, but the W3C has a new code of conduct, or CPC, which I don't remember what it stands for, but there's positive in there. I should know that. Positive, and but essentially, I think that the gist there is positive environment and positive work environment.
It actually doesn't have positive. It's Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct, but
yeah, Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct, no positive, but the title for the positive work environment at W3C. So essentially, we all share the responsibility of making the experience here positive for everyone. We all commit to treating each other with respect, professionalism, fairness, and sensitivity. That includes cases where emotions are high due to potential disagreements. And we all need to actively promote diversity and seek out diverse perspectives, and make sure that in terms of speaking time, in terms of we don't necessarily dominant members of the group don't necessarily occupy 90% of the talking time, and new members and people from all backgrounds have an opportunity to say what they want and need to say. On that front, unlike other working groups, we don't necessarily operate with a queue. We prefer a natural discussion as a way of gathering feedback and gathering, and participating here. With that said, if folks feel like we can probably use the chat here as a way for people to indicate that they want to speak, and then it's on us as chairs, but on everyone to essentially give them the floor and let them talk about that. Yeah, on top of that, as part of the CPC, there are a couple of sections, both around unacceptable behavior and around safety versus comfort. And these are sections, even if you, ideally, I think we should all just read the full document, and it's not super long, and it is well done. But in case you don't have time to read all of it, these two sections, I think, are super important to internalize. And yes, as it says, we are recording the event and we'll publish it online.
As far as this kind of intro block today goes, I think there's two other things I would like to do, Yov. One is just to kind of go over the agenda, just to kind of give everybody an overview of the week. And the second thing would be, if we have time, maybe just to go down the list and just quickly say who you are or who you work for or anything that you want, just to kind of do a really quick intro round. I think we could probably just try to go alphabetically down the list at some point, if that sounds good to everyone. Why don't we start with the agenda? I'm going to try to switch the tab that I'm sharing. Let me know if you see the agenda. This is the same link that we shared in the chat if anybody wants to follow along. Is the agenda showing right now? Okay, so obviously we're kind of in the intro section. We've split out each day into, I think, 4 to 5 main topics. Kind of have half-hour slots with a break in the middle at 10:30 Pacific. It'll be 1:30 Eastern. And then kind of having afternoon 1 or 2 sessions as well. So for today, we are currently in the intro section. I think Michael's going to be talking about frame timing and smoothness reporting next. Cliff Crocker was going to be talking about some of speed curves hot issues when he's able to join. We have topics on scheduling APIs and event timing later. Tuesday, we have pre-rendering, single page app reporting, BF cache from Yov, and an update on is input pending, which would be great. Wednesdays, a bit longer. We are talking about network diagnostics, measure memory, and then that block we wanted to talk about the rechartering and call for editors as well. We'll wrap up the day with long task attribution and JavaScript self-profiling. And then finally on Thursday, we have a bigger discussion on TAO and Cores Corp and all those kinds of related opt-ins, some updates. Oh, yep.
Yeah, with WebPerfWG folks. So we'll have
wonderful.
more folks joining.
Some updates from Ian on reporting API and more reporting API proposal, I think, from Yov as well. And then we have a little bit of overflow time on Thursday in case any discussion particularly goes long. We could always tack it on there if there's other things to discuss. I would say, if there's anything really urgent that anybody wants to talk about, certainly bring it up now or in the document, and we can try to fit it in, especially if we run under time for one of these other things. But that's kind of how the schedule is flowing at this point. So we can probably do intros in a moment. Any other things to discuss first, Yov?
Just in terms of scribing, just minutes before we started the call, Michael suggested that we could have backup scribes. So me and Nick can take on primary scribe and take turns in that, and then have folks that pick up the slack for bits and pieces where we where we miss out. So that could be like if folks are okay with that. We could have volunteers for secondary scribes and maybe start a list somewhere in the doc, and then we can pick someone from that list.
Yep, and we would probably need to give them full editing rights on the document as well, because I think right now it's comment only.
Yeah.
So if anybody wants to suggest your name there, and we can go from there. I will stop presenting at this point, and why don't we just do a quick round of introductions. I'll start with myself, Nick Jansma. I work at Akamai these days on our Impulse RUM performance monitoring product. I work in Boomerang, their JavaScript library that collects RUM data. So that's where a lot of my points of view come from, is gathering as much data as we can in a privacy-focused way. I'll pass it on to Yov.
Hi, Yoav Weiss. Work as part of the Chrome team on many different web performance related things, and been chairing this group for the last 2 years.
Why don't, at this point, we try to go down alphabetically on the list? I'm looking at the person's list in here, and it looks like Alex is next, if you don't mind.
All right. Yes, I'm Alex Christensen. I work at Apple, primarily on WebKit.
I think I'm up. Hi, I'm Andrew Comenos. I'm a software engineer on Facebook's browser team. I think it's
Annie, if you're available, if you want.
Yeah, hey, I'm Annie Sullivan. I work on Chrome on the web platform, mostly on performance metrics.
Ben would be next. And sorry, alphabetically by first name is just how it's sorted in the chat window right now.
Okay, I'm Benjamin DeCosmic. I work at Mozilla on performance and a variety of metrics type things.
Yeah, Nick, maybe you can post a link to the list you're looking at, because
So in chat, there's a sorted by first name or your visible name in Hangouts, but you yourself are always at the top of the list, so you don't know your own order. So maybe Nick, if you could just call people out.
Yes, I will call people out. That works better. Okay, Karine, please, if you don't mind.
I'm Karine Bournet, and I work for W3C. I'm staff contact for the group.
Thank you, Dinko.
Hi, I'm Dinko here. I'm with Perf Engineer at Salesforce, specifically with the Lightning UI platform group.
Welcome. Eric.
My name is Eric Portis. I'm a web platform advocate at Cloudinary, working on image and videos, a lot of performance stuff.
Gilles.
Hi, I'm Gilles. I work on performance at Wikipedia.
Ian. If you're there, Ian.
There's my mic. Sorry. Ian Cleland. I work at Google. For the purposes of this group, I'm spec editor of the reporting and network error logging APIs.
Thank you. Mark.
Hello, I'm Mark Honenberg. I work at Facebook on browser engineering stuff.
Welcome. Michael.
Yeah, Michael, I work for Google on the Chrome Speed Metrics team. Sort of recently, I've been working on some layout stability stuff, but I am also working on frame timing and graphics smoothness, as well as trying to tackle some of the SPA issues moving forward.
Wonderful. Nicholas.
Hello, I'm Nicholas. I work in Google Chrome as well in the Speed Metrics team, and I work a lot on WebPerf APIs and specifications.
Thank you. Noah.
Hi, I'm Noah Lemon. I'm a software engineer at Facebook on the browser engineering team.
Noam.
Hi, I'm Noam from Microsoft. I work on Excel Online performance improvement team.
Great. Nolan.
Hi, I'm Nolan Lawson. I work at Salesforce on the UI platform performance team.
Welcome. And I'm sorry, I forget if your first name is Peter Pearl. Is that it?
Yep.
Okay.
So probably I would go third, but it's okay. So I'm Peter. I'm working at Trivago in the interface platform team, and we're also doing some interesting stuff on the web performance aspect.
Awesome. Patrick Hulse first.
Hey everyone, I'm Patrick Hulse. I'm a contributor to Chromium and related projects like Lighthouse.
Fantastic. Patrick Meenan.
Hey, I'm Pat Meenan, work at Catchpoint on web page test, synthetic performance testing, measurement, that kind of stuff.
All the good stuff. Robert.
Hi, I'm Rob Flack. I work at Google on the Chrome team on input and animation, and in particular, some of the smoothness API measurements.
Thank you. Ryosuke.
I'm Ryosuke Iwa from Apple.
Welcome. Scott.
Yeah, hey, Scott Hesley from Google, work on scheduling and scheduling APIs on Chrome.
Sean.
Hey, I'm Sean, working on Mozilla, software engineer on performance.
Stephen.
Morning, everyone. I'm Stephen Bougon. I work for Salesforce, and I'm a performance engineer for our CRM product.
Welcome. Subrata.
Hi, I'm Subrata. I work with Salesforce, primarily on the W analytics.
Welcome. Tim.
Hi, I'm Tim Dresser. I work for Google on Chrome Performance.
Tom.
Hey there, I'm Tom McCabe. I work on performance at Squarespace.
Cool. And Ulan.
Hi, I'm Ulan. I work on Chrome in V8 team, mostly on garbage collection and memory management. And I've been working on performance measure memory API, which I will have update on Wednesday.
Fantastic. I think that's the list unless somebody joined while we were going down it. Apologies if I butchered anybody's name, but thanks for everybody for giving introductions. I think it's good to set the context a little bit. Anything else you have before we kind of head into the first session with Michael?
I think we're good. We're good to go.
All right.
Take it away?
Yes, please.
Take it away.
All right, let me try to present. I'm expecting one person to join, but he might be here shortly. First, confirming that folks see this. There we go. Okay, thumbs up. I have to switch tabs to see. All right, all right. So I wanted to do a quick round of introductions about smoothness reporting for animations and scrolling. There's been plenty of requests for this over time. I will say this might be sort of information dense, and starting at the beginning are things that we are more confident and have stronger opinions in, and where we would like strong feedback if anyone disagrees. And as the talk goes on, it's sort of more an introduction of options moving forward, but they're not necessarily set in stone. And so I don't want to get bogged down into details if folks hate sort of the end of it, if that makes sense. So, you know, why discuss smoothness? Animation and scrolling is a big part of UX on the web. Stuttering tends to be a visible problem for users and leaves a bad impression of a page overall. And so hopefully I don't have to convince folks of this. This has been long requested part of WebPerf. And it's really hard for developers to know exactly when stutters or hiccups or jank happens, why it happens, or what exactly was the thing that slowed. So what I want to cover today is how exactly to measure smoothness, some options for how we can report that data, and then I'll leave it with open questions that come to mind for me, but of course there might be more. All right, so first of all, measuring smoothness. So I think when we talk about smoothness, it's often in terms of FPS. Certainly for things like gaming, this is what folks usually talk about in FPS, and that's the ultimate measure. But when it comes to the web, this has some flaws. So first of all, a perfectly static website still feels perfectly smooth, even if it's not generating any new frames. And then second of all, what does a frame even mean when you have multi-threaded rendering, separate system compositors, variable screen refresh rates, and certainly now we have like like very fast refresh rates on modern screens. So what does FPS even measure, especially if you're showing lots of stale frames on time and quickly, or doing many partial updates? So the way we've been thinking about it increasingly is it's not so much about FPS, it's about missed opportunities to show expected animation updates. And in many ways, this is becoming a bad name, but we typically call this just dropped frames. It doesn't necessarily mean the frame was entirely dropped, it just means that it missed some opportunity to show some update. And so the types of things that we consider as needing to have an update, so like animations, include scrolling, pinch zoom, JS-driven animations like graph loops, or just repeated updates to animated properties of the DOM, CSS and web animations, canvas, video, continuous input handling like drawing applications where you have your finger down and you're drawing where the finger's going. And there are things that do update the visual state of the page that we don't necessarily consider animations, and this is typically tracked using other types of metrics, such as just inserting new content onto the page, clicking a button that takes a long time even if it produces some UX response, even if it's in stages, or forms and how their appearance changes as you input into them, or things like background loading. Okay, so defining drop frames is anytime an animation is expected to produce an update for a vsync, yet for some reason, either the page doesn't provide that update or the browser does not do so in time. We consider that a drop frame. So some things to note is that animations are not always expected to produce an update for every single vsync. And then for things like scrolling, we expect to update the scroll position to a certain point in time with each frame. So let me give you some examples. So this is like a RAF animation. So every single frame we call request animation frame, and we run this animation step. And some of the time, every other frame specifically, we update some style on an element. And half the time we just skip and do nothing. So in this case, only half the frames are expected to make a visual update. And we know that even if there wasn't a visual update, this animation could have happened if it was handled in time, if that makes sense. For CSS animations, you can define them in a way where there are expected idle periods. So in this case, the keyframes here, you have a period where 50% of the time the transform is exactly the same, and so the animation isn't moving. And so there won't be any new frames for the perspective of this specific animation. So even if for whatever reason the browser doesn't generate a new frame, it wasn't a problem. There was no visual update that was expected. Or for scrolling effects, here's two different examples. The example on the left, you have a non-passive event listener for the mouse wheel event, which will take a long time to execute. And since this is non-passive, it will actually delay scrolling. However, once the scroll starts, it could be perfectly smooth. And so the animating part of the scroll is smooth, even though there's an initial delay. And this is a bit of a perhaps contentious example, so we could discuss it at the end. Whereas on the right here, you have a scroll that does have a passive event listener, so the scroll itself is not delayed. However, there is a styling update to the page on every single new scroll position that takes a long time. And so this is, the visual update will not correspond to the scroll itself, and this is a problem. All right, so we'd love to know if folks think of smoothness in terms of drop frames or partial updates or expected animation updates appearing on time. So I'd love to hear feedback on that. But once we have this data, there's still lots of different ways we can actually summarize it and report it. So this is a screenshot of Chromium's dev tools. Not all types of animations are captured here just yet, but you could still see that there's like a lot of different overlapping animations. Some are very short, some are very long in the timeline. And so you could slice this data in different ways. This is a fabricated example. Just checking who joined. So that's a drool.
Cliff joined. But
Okay, sorry. I wasn't sure if that was a question or a thing. So if we were to report all of the raw data points, you can imagine slicing up the whole page for every single frame, every single vsync, giving it a frame ID, and then going down the list for every single animation, some of which start at different times, take a certain amount of duration, and run during using different strategies: CSS animations, scrolls, graph loops, video, JS animations, and so on. And so for each frame ID, you might have multiple things happening at once, some of which produce an update on time and others do not. So in theory, we could present all of this data for every single frame ID, for every single animation, exactly what happened in the context of this. But of course, this has lots of concerns. Ergonomics, it's just a lot of data. It's not really useful on its own. There's lots of post-processing that needs to happen. Performance of reporting just this much data all at once, especially if an animation is defined in terms of lots of little pieces moving independently. And there might be security and privacy implications with reporting all of that data. Another option is to report per animation. At the end of the animation, just generate a summary. So since these animations can be defined using different strategies, started at different times, respond to distinct events, you could have metadata that's unique per animation, which is useful to report, sort of slicing along the row level in the previous chart that I showed. So I think this also would help simplify attribution. If a particular animation is slow or janky, it would immediately become visible in its individual summary. And I'll show an API in a second, but the interesting part is that every single animation would get an expected number of frames that were, a number that were expected frames generated, and the number that was actually produced over a certain duration. And from that, you could turn it into sort of a percentage smoothness or average effective FPS for that one specific animation. And I presented a variant of this earlier this year, and so I linked to it here on the slides. So a strawman for this might be creating a new type of performance entry for an animation, of entry type animation. It would report the type of animation that was running, when it started, how long it took, the vsync interval during that animation, the number of frames produced expected. And so you could turn this into the number of missed frames, the number of expected frames over that duration. So it would be very useful, I think. You can also provide some attribution, like the element that was animating or the ID of the animation, because it's at the animation level. Another entirely different option is to think about the page itself and its timeline. This is more akin to the original frame timing proposal, where rather than summarizing each animation when it's done or after a certain amount of time, you can imagine reporting for every single frame all of the things that were happening within that frame and whether they appeared on time. And this perhaps better matches to what the user feels like they are actually experiencing when they are navigating the page. So a strawman for this might be performance frame timing, entry type frame, where you get the presentation time of every single frame, possibly fuzzed, and then the number of updates to animations within that frame that were expected and the number that were produced. An intricacy here is that not everything that went into this frame was because of an animation. So you might actually have no expected updates for an animation, or maybe there was no paint update at all. And we'll talk about some options for variants here. Finally, you could imagine generating a single global report. So taking the whole table of all of the data and just reporting a final smoothness, kind of like final LCP or final CLS. You could imagine perhaps reporting this several times, key moments, visibility changes, that sort of thing. And if we did it this way, you might be able to fit this into the API that was presented in option 2. So just treat the whole page as a single animation. And so it would also have a certain amount of time and interval frames produced and that sort of thing. And of course, you could sort of mix and match. Potentially, you could offer frame level data alongside animation level data. You can also offer a single summary, like option 4, but offer details within it that helps you compute some of the other alternatives. All right, so if folks are in agreement about the concept of dropped frames being the most important thing to measure, and the options for how we can present that data make sense, then we can begin to discuss which are most preferable. But we still have a bunch of open questions. First, the easy stuff. I'm curious to know what other vendors currently measure for animation smoothness. Of course, do folks agree on this drop frames perspective or expected animation updates? In terms of defining animations, some of them are easier than others, especially for JS-driven animations to animatable properties outside of ref loops. I think will require lots of work. Rob's here to help because he's been working on this. And then perhaps harder questions are, is a dropped frame just a Boolean signal? For a single frame, something didn't update that we expected to update. Does that mean this whole frame is sort of partially updated? Or do we want to count? There were 10 expected updates and only 9 of them completed, so it's 90% good enough. Or does each animation need to have a weight, like an impact region? If there's a tiny spinner in the corner, is it less important somehow than a big animation? Another question is, when are we measuring smoothness? Are we measuring smoothness from the start of page load or after sort of page load completes? We absolutely expect more smoothness hiccups during load. And so is it more important to sort of consider the amount of time it takes to settle and to become smooth, and then after which it needs to be always smooth and stable? Or do we just blend it into a single metric? And then perhaps like the scroll example that I gave earlier, do we need to make a distinct notion of how long it took to start an animation? So the latency until start, and then smoothness afterwards, or again, do we blend it into a single metric? And with that, I think that's all I have. Open it up for discussion.
Can I ask what do you mean by expected? So in option 2, you mentioned that you want to report the expected frames and produced frames. What do you mean by expected frames?
Sure. So for something like a CSS animation, if the keyframe was defined in a way that we expected it to move from the previous frame, and it didn't for whatever reason, like the browser didn't actually render it on time, then this was a frame that wasn't produced even though it was expected, versus it could be in the middle of an animation, but let me go back to the example that I gave. Like here, between 25% and 75% of the keyframes, there's no actual visual update that is to be expected. So it doesn't matter whether a frame was actually produced, an updated frame was actually produced. It will look visually identical to the previous one. And so there's no need to consider whether the frame is skipped.
Right, but I mean, even between the time when there is a visible update, it's unclear to me what is the number of expected frames, right? Because the number of expected frames might be dependent on the animation itself, in a sense that some environments, in particular in certain iOS devices and iPads, they adjusted frame rates based on what's being animated. So it's unclear to me what the expected number of frames even mean here.
Yeah.
And number of expectation, there's a sort of a feedback loop here, right? It's not. Yeah, it's totally unclear to me what that even means.
So in option 2 in the proposal, and again, the actual options for presenting are like the most in the air, but there would be an interval, which is the average vsync interval. So if you do increase the frame rate, the interval is expected to change. So between the number of produced expected and interval, I think you could get a fairly decent.
Well, I mean, assuming you can get that information,
sure.
I don't think we do have that capability. Yeah, I mean, it's so unclear to me what this means. Also, in a JavaScript API case, like browser have to render the frame in order to decide whether there's any visual update or not, right? How do we know that there was a frame expected? I mean, if you call back and if, you know, there was no drawing, do we say that like we missed the frame or we didn't miss the frame? I mean, also like what happened, like it's very unclear to me what this expected, like expectation of frame is very unclear concept to me.
Is all of the, like, it is unclear in the case where the vsync interval is not constant. If the vsync interval is constant, no, I guess we'd argue it's still unclear because was a frame different from the previous frame is hard to define. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, also like what happens in the CSS animation case, right? Like if you on a device that is capable, let's say, updating the display at 120 hertz, yet initially the screen was throttled to be a lower frame rate, that's at 30 hertz, because there was no animations, and then starts to ramp up. So then, like, do we say while screen was ramping up, we missed a frame because display was capable of running at 120 hertz, and animation could have run at 120 hertz, but it was not ramping at 120 hertz. I mean, it's like it's totally unclear to me what all of this means, right? I mean, so I think the conception that there's an expected number of frames at any given point or any given time frame is a bit misleading, because the number of frames that the system decides to produce are dependent and congruent on the very animation that's being done.
Right. I mean, the goal here was to say there was an opportunity to present like vsync, and for whatever reason, the opportunity was not taken. Either the page was slow, the browser was slow. But in this case, you're unaware of how many opportunities, or you can affect the number of opportunities. Sajrul has his hand raised. I'm eager to hear what he says.
Yeah, so I'm not really familiar with all the browser vendors, but I believe there's something called sort of the next rendering opportunity or something like that. So if there's something we expect to produce from the page, then that would be, that's kind of what the next rendering or the next expected frame would be. So the question here is if the device is at a different frame rate when it starts, then essentially, so the plan here, I think, is to measure the performance of the page and the browser. And we have to sort of depend on the system to tell us what the frequency or the display frequency is. So if the device itself is at a lower frame rate at the beginning, so let's say the example you gave, the device is configured to run at 30 FPS at the beginning of the animation, and after it starts, it goes up to 120 FPS. Then towards the beginning, while the device is at the 30 FPS, we would expect the frames to be produced at 30 FPS. And as long as the animation frames are produced at 30 FPS, we would consider that as a perfectly smooth animation. And when the page or the device switches to 120 FPS setting, at that time, we would expect to produce at 120 FPS. And if we are not able to keep up, then we would sort of count those as dropped frames. I don't know if that sort of makes sense.
Well, I mean, but what I'm saying is that if the browser and ultimately website is not producing fast enough frame, we would never ramp up 120 hertz, right? So, like, I mean, because the display itself throttle itself, if the app is being slow, so it's unclear to me what that means. Like it. I mean, at some point, I'm hypothetically, right? It's possible that you stay always in 30 hertz because you're slow.
If I understand correctly, sorry, go ahead, Yoav.
No, I was just going to say that you raised your hand, so you should.
If I understand correctly, so one option is we just use the refresh rate that we end up with. So if, like Sudril mentioned, we're switching between 30 and 120, we say we're expected to produce once per vsync if there's a page update. So that is well defined, I think. The problem is it doesn't correlate well with user experience, because you can be switching the refresh rate all over the place without impacting user experience at all. The alternative there, I think, is to look at dropped frames per unit time, not drop frames per expected frames, which I think still has this problem to some degree, but at least not quite as badly. You still end up with more chances to drop frames the higher your refresh rate.
Yeah, but I mean, I think even concept of dropped frame is a bit dubious, right? Because if let's say system decides that, oh, hey, like this website is producing frames very slowly, so we will never ramp up to 120 hertz, even though the device is capable of going to 120 hertz. From a user's perspective, that's dropping frames, Like if everywhere else you're expecting 120 hertz smooth animations, and all of a sudden this website, you're stuck at the 20 hertz or 30 hertz. From user's perspective, what is this? Why is this page so junky? Right? So yeah, I don't know. It's hard to.
So Ryosuke,
what this means?
Does ramping up the refresh rate rely on overproducing frames? So for things like CSS animations, since it's specified somewhat semantically, the system can just decide, it predicts, it knows more frames would be better. But what about for things like RAF loops?
Wait, what about them?
Well, for a developer would produce a frame when given the opportunity, and so the system predicts that there might be use for having a higher refresh rate and to give more opportunity.
I mean, it tries to go up from the faster rate, right? And then if you're being slow, it will just decide, okay, you're slow, so we're not going to ramp up.
So which examples would there be where you would not miss opportunities given to you, but also not present the opportunity to sort of ramp up? I'm not sure if this is hypothetical or
wait, could you?
So if the system has to first ramp up the refresh rate and then see if opportunities are missed, and then decide that it needs to stay at the lower refresh rate, then you would still have some drop frames, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, not really, because systems is actively deciding to ramp up or not, right? So like the systems are still deciding how fast you are getting things done. And then based on that, they decide, okay, you're fast, so let's go faster. I mean, to be fair, like I don't really know the exact algorithms here, so I don't want to be like,
Tim has his hand up.
Go too much in details here, but yeah.
Ryosuke, it sounds like you have a fair bit more experience than we do at handling these variable refresh rate cases. Do you have any thoughts on a reasonable strategy for quantifying animation smoothness in the face of variable refresh rates?
All I know is this is an extremely difficult problem. I mean, it's hard to say like if there's anybody who has successfully come up with a good metric here. Like, I mean, it's really hard to say. I mean, like you said earlier, I think in a case where the refresh rate is not changing at all, right? Like the metric's kind of clear. Let's say you are 120 hertz, you're not drawing 120 hertz. It's very clear. I think the challenge is that by nature of like the user experience was the sort of smooth animation versus the battery life trade-off. The real life devices in general do like this dynamic frequency adjustment and so forth. So yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a great suggestion here.
Rob has his hand up. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so it sounds like the other option would be, like, if we know that the system can choose to ramp up the frame rate, then we would consider any choice to run at a lower frame rate being dropped frames. But I guess the issue with that would be that in these phases of ramp up, we would be considering it to have dropped frames, even though like there's some system limitations on how often the frame rate can change.
I mean, not to mention system not let us know that that has happened, right? I mean, it they won't really tell us why, you know.
So go ahead.
So would it make sense to? I mean, it all seems very hard problem to think about, but would it make sense for the API to actually allow the developer to specify what he is interested of smoothness criteria? And I'm not sure exactly how to define it, but at least from my experience, some applications are probably okay with 20 FPS for most actions or specific actions, and some it's intolerable below, I don't know, 50 or 60 frames per second that you want to sustain. Would allowing it to be adaptable by the user or configurable by the user would help in this case? I'm just asking.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think alternative, I'm not saying that this is a good idea, is to sort of like say, oh, here's the theoretical maximum frame rate this device is capable of. And by the way, like, you know, you would have missed the frame. You know, it won't be like an accurate number in the sense that, like, that the theoretical maximum frame rate may not have been used by the device anyway at any given point, but it will still give you information about, oh, like, oh, this device is supposed to be able to run at 120 hertz, but like, you know, my website's slow, so it could only generate 60 hertz. So that might be actually useful information to know for a website. I don't know if that. I feel like that's a slightly different. Like that's addressing a slightly different use cases than what's being originally proposed in this presentation. So I don't know if that would match.
Yeah. The original here was to say the worst thing that can happen is an opportunity was available. This screen could refresh faster. The battery was high enough to allow whatever refresh rate. And as defined, the animation had a useful update to give. And yet it was not, for whatever reason, actually updated. This is what a user would feel as like this is the worst thing that could happen. Now, there are other things to optimize for, like pushing the envelope of how often you are given an opportunity to render. And so things like the interval property, you might want to optimize for having that be as high as possible, or like the interval should be as low as possible, which is a secondary thing to optimize for, I guess, but you definitely want to make sure you present for every opportunity given. And we got a couple folks raising hands. Patrick literally has his hand up, and Tim's been waiting in line for a while. Maybe Tim first.
Go ahead, Pat.
Yeah, just a casual observation, if it might be worth stealing from the video game industry again and just looking at how they evaluate games and graphics cards for frame rates and minimum frame rates, percentiles, that kind of stuff. They've been through this a lot. And you could report like the device supported frame rate or the target frame rate, and then over whatever period, the minimum and a few percentiles or something like that.
Yeah, that research definitely sounds valuable to me. The other angle we could take, which I know has a bunch of downsides, would be to look at the time we take to produce a frame, which I think has the nice property of sort of dodging a bunch of the vsync interval issues at the downside of being less representative of user experience. But maybe that's an angle we could consider.
So that was all super useful feedback. Anyone have anything on a completely different tangent? Benjamin?
I would like to learn
Sorry.
how other browser vendors or other sort of analytics providers measure smoothness right now, or sort of have looked into measuring smoothness. So I think Patrick talked about video games. Are there other use cases or people that measure smoothness right now on the web?
So from a RUM analytics point of view, we do capture a very simple metric just of frame rate over time during page load, but we do not find it to be a very valuable metric to capture because for all of the issues presented here and just inconsistencies and whether a page should be animating or not, or presenting or not. So we're definitely looking for more useful user experience like metrics. And we're just using request animation frame measurements for that.
Hey, Michael, is the intent here to kind of grow towards media capabilities working group and have this be applicable to video content in the future?
I hadn't considered that explicitly. I mean, video is one type of animation that is considered here. Like if the video doesn't produce frames on time, that would be not smooth, but
I think the video use case to do a good job of that requires a whole lot of additional data around what bitrate is being streamed and all kinds of extra data, some of which I think is already exposed for video playback. My guess is that to serve that use case properly, you really do need first-class support for video streaming, not animations in general. But
so you intend to have different APIs here?
My intuition is that that will be the correct way to go. I think this should handle videos in a sane way, but I don't think it will give you sufficient metadata to do a good job of video optimization.
what do other folks think in general about focusing on smoothness as drop frames or as lost opportunities to update when there was an expectation to update?
I think in a lot of ways it's nice to be able to think about the reporting on the negative things that happen, right? So the painful processes, the things that you miss, the dropped frames, those are in some ways easier to present or track because they're very intuitive that there was pain here, there was something wrong that happened here. So even just getting counts of these things that happen over time or whatever is a very useful metric to track.
In case folks didn't see it, Karine says that video and media use cases are part of other working group scopes. All right.
That doesn't mean that we should not talk about it. We can talk to other groups as well.
Okay, Michael, was there anything else that you want to get feedback on for this part right now?
I think not. I think next steps are you should see more from us. Just yeah, expect more on this topic, and we'll put some thought into the feedback that was given. Thanks, folks.
Fantastic, and thank you for
Is
presenting.
there any? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just wrapping up. Go ahead, Rusuke.
Yeah. Is there any like a WICZ or like some sort of repo where this is being discussed?
That's coming next. Like I'll probably do that soon.
Okay, let us know when that's there.
Great question. Okay, thank you, Michael. Next up on the agenda, we did have a presentation from Cliff Crocker of Speed Curve. Cliff, I think I see you there.
Yep, I'm here.
Hey, buddy. All right, are you ready to? Do you have anything to present? Are you ready to chat?
I am ready to chat and present. So
Even better.
I'm actually sorry. I'm not. I don't use Google Meets a lot, so I'm just getting familiar here with sharing.
Bottom rightish, there should be a present now.
Oh yeah, got it.
Yeah. Another note. It looks like the raises hand feature is only supported for some folks, but not everyone. So we could just use the chat for or like hand emoji or whatever for people who want to say something. And
yeah, and actually it works better for me if we actually chat as we're going through some of this, because it really was meant to be a little bit more discussion based. So
fantastic.
One last thing, can you share a link to the slides?
I will.
Okay, awesome.
Is it cool if I do that after?
Sure.
And Cliff, we had done a really quick round of intros before you joined as well. So if you just want to do a very quick intro on yourself when you're ready.
Yeah, 1 second. I realized I'm running 2 different browsers here. This is going to be a little bit of a problem. So give me 1 second. Good time for a bio break. Okay, back to it. No. I have to grant. Hold on a second. Because you're recording, my browser wasn't ready for it. 1 sec.
Sorry. Oh.
Doing a restart.
Okay, so who's doing an interpretive dance in the meantime?
We could have a contest for who has the funniest hat to wear after the break. Or mask.
Yeah, or maybe we can. Oh, hey, Cliff. We can't hear you.
How about now?
Yes.
Now
can you see me too?
We can see your screen and hear you. And your video is in another area. So yes, we're good.
Okay. Okay, so you see my screen, you can hear me. I really apologize. I actually had to recreate these slides from memory right before this because I was in the mountains doing this and apparently just botched everything. So I apologize. It was kind of a little bit hot. Really quick, sorry for the delay. I'm Cliff and I work for SpeedCurve. I'm a product person. I've been doing web performance and web performance monitoring and analytics for roughly the past 18 years. And I live in Denver, Colorado. I really, really love and follow all the work that this working group has been doing. And I know that I've been bearing the fruits of your labor for many, many years. So first off, very humbled to be talking to this group. Thank you for everything that you're doing. And thanks for giving me some time today. The things that I wanted to hit on we're going to be a little bit, you can kind of take a little bit of a brain break because a lot of this is not going to be super deep into everything that I know you guys spend a lot of time working on, but really to give you some feedback mainly and kind of talk to you a little bit about what we're seeing in the wild, what our customers are seeing and reporting on, and how things are being sort of perceived with some of the latest work that you've been doing. The three areas I want to talk about if we have time. One, Core Web Vitals, and then two, measuring performance of ads in the wild, and then three, just quickly touching on server timing. This does work a lot better for me if you guys just want to unmute yourselves and ask questions, if you can do that, because I do have two screens going and I'll try to keep an eye on people raising hands, but I probably won't do a great job of it. So feel free to just interact and ask questions, because part of this is me asking some questions of you. First off, I want to give the quick positive feedback that Core Web Vitals has had, I think, on performance in general in this industry. We have seen a huge wave of interest, not just for our product, which is great, especially in a crazy time like we're seeing right now with COVID, where we're seeing our business growing and doing really well, but also just in terms of people wanting to make their sites faster. There's been a huge wave of interest. A lot of it's coming from people outside of our echo chambers. It's coming outside of performance. It's coming outside of engineering. It's very much coming in from SEO teams, marketing, CEOs and down, really kind of a top-down driven approach, because people are very, very tuned into the work that I credit Annie and team and everyone else that they've been doing with Core Web Vitals. So huge kudos to everybody. There's a really strong desire out there for people to learn more about this, as well as improve their vitals. I'll call this a con, but it's really not that much of a con. I think where we're at is great. However, I think that there needs to be more outside of just the work that Google's been doing, as well as some of those vendors like ourselves, Akamai, to sort of evangelize around Core Web Vitals. I'd also like to see it, and I think our customers kind of want to unify on some of the things they're looking at across these other areas, because you are getting more inbound requests from marketing, from SEO. They want to see it in their other tools as well. So I think there's a big push for how do we get Core Web Vitals to be something that's not as much of a Google-centric metric and more of a performance or analytics or just user experience set of metrics that people care about. Whether that's Facebook using this to drive some of their behavior around what they're placing in terms of ads, other tools outside of performance tools like Adobe Analytics and other places where these folks might live. I just think that there's huge opportunities there now that we've taken that first step. So how are people doing? I just grabbed some data this morning just to sort of look and see for LCP, our customers, and I just grabbed I'm looking at the US, I'm not looking at all of our customer base. We have a lot of customers in Europe, probably the majority of our customers are, but I thought the US was kind of more interesting due to where I see some of the bigger opportunities. But for LCP, the 75th percentile, if we look across all of our customers, they're doing pretty well. They're at 2.2 seconds. They're sort of right at that threshold that we've given the recommendations on, and even at the 95th percentile, seeing for some of this. And again, this is desktop as well in the US, so keep that in mind. Happy to share more data. Yeah.
Cliff, is this synthetic or RUM data?
I apologize, Nick. Yeah, this is RUM. So this is from our Lux product across the board for everybody. So I will follow up when I share the links to this with some stuff in an appendix that looks at mobile and looks at other regions as well. But I just sort of wanted to use this to illustrate. LCP, I think, has been one of the easier to understand Core Web Vitals for our customers, and one that they've actually been working on for a while in terms of improvement. It registers with them. It just makes sense, especially for our commerce customers and people that are focused on getting product imagery and things like that to the page really quickly. So no surprise that they tend to be doing well here. I did circle a little bump here. I think this is 86, where Annie and team, I believe, rolled out some changes to improve the LCP metric, where we were seeing some false positives before with really low LCP scores and FCP scores as well, due to the opacity issues and things that we saw. So we are seeing an uptick in that. So good. It looks like it's more accurate now. Synthetic, we absolutely see it when we look at test by test and case by case. We saw a huge improvement there for LCP. The bad side of this is this means a whole lot more support calls that we get and inbound that we get when people are like, hey, wait a minute, how come LCP changed so quickly? So I know that this is not perfect, and I'm absolutely an advocate of getting things out there in the wild as soon as possible. But when we see changes and big changes to metrics, I think it does drive a little bit of issues with our customers around confidence in the metric and can they really trust it. Specifically, those that actually went in and looked at the film strip and saw, LCP happening, before there was even a start render on any of the web page test film strips or anything like that. So great that we're fixing it. Great that we're addressing it. I think there might be probably more things that we need to do to make LCP more accurate in all those edge cases. In general, I think it's been widely accepted. It's a pretty awesome metric for people to focus on.
Cliff, can I add one thing too?
Yeah.
Even just around you seeing the visible metric change here, and I know that you had mentioned with a recent version of Chrome how it changed it. One thing as a fellow analytic provider that has been valuable for us is to actually have a public change log, if you will, from vendors when they note important changes like this that may be reflective in metrics. So that's something that we can give to our customers as well that notice very similar things. And as you said, it builds actually in some cases more confidence in it because you can have something to point to. So I just want to say, I do appreciate Chrome. I know is doing this. I don't know if the other vendors are yet, but it is very valuable whenever there are not like breaking changes or just significant changes that may be reflective in version to version.
Yeah, I just learned about that from Annie the last time we met, and it's now like a saved reply in our support when we talk to people about this because we get a lot of inbound about it. So absolutely, thank you so much for that, and would love to see it as well. So good call out. CLS, on the other hand, this is kind of an interesting one too. So this is one where we're still sort of figuring out. I'll talk about some of the issues we've run into, and I think you all are aware of some of them as well. But in general, people seem to be doing relatively well here. I think this might be a little bit different when we break it out by industry. We absolutely see higher CLS scores when we're looking at media than we do traditional sites. A lot of that driven by either display ad performance or just maybe not following as many of the best practices or more complex DOM.
Sorry, what is CLS?
Sorry, cumulative layout shift. I apologize. I should have stated that first. So of the core web vitals, largest contentful paint, first input delay, and cumulative layout shift. There's actually a great, if somebody wants to post this in the chat, there's a great blog that Nick just did that really goes into the details of CLS and how to measure it and some of the caveats there, which is an awesome reference post. But essentially measuring as things are dynamically shifting around the page and changing for the user. Very simple way of stating it. Here's kind of here's some of the issues that we've seen though. So looking at this right out the gate, I think we knew this was going to be a hard metric to get our heads around due to the fact that it wasn't really a time-based metric and it wasn't really it kind of is a score-based metric. It is a score-based metric, I guess. So it was a little bit hard to sort of tell people what it meant, how to interpret it. I think we've, with most of our customers, we got over that hump pretty quickly because they got it. Higher score is bad, lower score is good. However, they started running into a lot of challenges, and I will say this probably makes up maybe 40 to 50% of the support questions we get in around core web vitals. Is why the hell are my CLS metrics so different when I'm comparing field and lab data? So from a Lighthouse report, we can see this CLS score of 0.13 from the Crux data versus 0.023 in a synthetic test. And this is really, as we've found and known, due to a great term that I stole from Nick's blog, due to the load limited nature of synthetic, where they are dependent on that onload event from firing, as well as seeing in Crux where essentially they're waiting until after the load event until that visibility state changes in the page. This also impacts most of our RUM tooling. I know at least for us it does, where we're tied to the load event. So you can see at the bottom that CLS score for RUM at the 75th percentile matches more closely with what we see for synthetic. However, trying to explain and reproduce CLS scores for data that's coming from Crux, you can do it and you can show customers where it's coming in and when those layout shifts that are occurring are coming after that load event. However, it's really hard for them to track down, and they're sitting there basically knowing that they're potentially going to be judged by the Crux data, but the tooling doesn't necessarily support what's being collected there. Actually, I want to pause for a second there just to make sure, one, everybody sort of understands this issue, and two, any commentary on it that I may be missing or need to be thinking about. All right. So for me anyway, this has been a big challenge is how do you talk about the numbers when they're so vastly different? I think for us, we definitely want to, sorry, one second. If I was getting a comment there. I thought I was.
Yeah, Benjamin wrote, he wants to know, so how are you explaining this?
Thank you. Yeah, so basically how we're explaining it is that, CLS is a cumulative score. It is, it does continue to accumulate as the life cycle of that page continues. It's not bound to load time. It's not bound to other things if the user's staying on the page as being measured, by Chrome and by Crux really. So the way we explain it is we end up having to essentially open up dev tools, which isn't the easiest thing to do when you're dealing with a lot of these inbound requests. We open up dev tools. We show when our beacon was actually fired, which tends to be right around the end of the load event or queued shortly thereafter, and then where those layout shifts are happening after the load event. So they can still get visibility into when they're happening, but unfortunately, our tools aren't showing them that, and it kind of sucks to not have a great way to really illustrate that and for them to repeat it. So to be honest, I don't know what the best option is here. Like, I don't know if this is something where, we just need to be better or have something. And I know I've talked a little bit with Yo about reporting API, other ways of looking at how we can measure or allow analytics providers to measure this after the load event to provide something more realistic, or if there's a better way to normalize what we're seeing between Crux and synthetic data.
Cliff, if I could just add, CLS is a full page lifecycle metric, and most of the issues you've just said, I believe, are more specific to comparing lab and RUM data, because lab data is currently like up until the load event, as opposed to full page lifecycle, and there's no way you can synthesize real user interactions. You don't actually know what's going to happen with all these things. I think there will be increasingly more metrics that fall into that bucket, like smoothness that I just talked about will be a full page lifecycle event, and it will have a different set of metrics issues. It might actually be the reverse problem, where smoothness will be worse during load than it will be post load, and so RUM will look nicer than a lab metric would signify. And then in terms of responsiveness, I think Nicholas is going to talk about that this week. We might be moving to measuring more responsiveness throughout the full page lifecycle. So layout stability has some unique issues in terms of it being complicated, or the way cumulative layout shift is maybe has some issues or whatnot. But the bigger issue is this full page lifecycle measurement, and how folks usually aren't thinking in these terms, and lab testing isn't set up yet to measure that. So just making that distinction that it's not CLS that's the bulk of the issue here, I think.
Yeah. So I think that I think that there are two problems here. One is that for all these user interaction dependent metrics, lab and RUM will inherently differ, and that is fine. That is life. We have to accept that. But I think that today, many of the RUM providers are not collecting metrics for the full lifetime of the page, but stop at some point on onload or at a later point. But as long as we only collect metrics up until a certain point in the page's lifetime, there will be differences between Crux, which collects them up until the renderer dies, and other and RUM vendors, and we need to try to close that gap. And and as Cliff said, I will talk about one potential solution to that in a couple of days.
Sorry, just one question. Is the main complaint based on the first of those differences, that is Lighthouse or in general lab setting versus your own data, or is the difference more about your own data versus the one in other tools like the Chrome user experience report?
Great question. I think it tends to be the latter, which starts the concern. It's like, hey, this is way overly optimistic because I'm thinking Crux that I've got something that's over 0.1, so I'm going to get flagged for it. but in your tool, you're telling me everything's great. Like, so it does start there, but then it turns into and now that I'm looking at the Lighthouse report and I compare, I also see that there's very different, stuff there. So Nicholas, I think the answer really is more the difference between our tools and Crux. I think that I haven't got a lot of feedback from our RUM versus someone else's RUM, like Impulse versus Lux. Like, are they seeing discrepancies there? Quite honestly, I don't think that there would be that many differences based on the methodology that I think we're both using. But I think the challenge does come back to how the tools are really, equipped to measure this. So analytics, like, this is sort of how we've always done it. We've always been sort of beholden to an event or a load event. Like, there are things we can gather after the page, and we have some metrics that we gather that aren't dependent on a load event from firing. But when you talk about the full life cycle of a page, have we really been measuring that? I mean, have we really? I think it's a great thing to think about, and I think it's great that we're starting to move this direction, but I don't know that the vendors are there yet in terms of our ability to actually do it. So for one, I do think it does fall on us, the analytics vendors, to sort of work with the Chrome team and others to figure this out and to try to normalize some of it. And if we have better tooling and better things we can do, like this reporting API, potentially, maybe that's a way to close some of that gap.
Although there's also sort of on a full session lifecycle problem. A 0.1 CLS for a 12-hour Gmail session versus a 0.1 CLS for a 2-second load of a media page are very different experiences.
Yeah, and so I did want to separate that many of these problems just described are not particular to CLS, but that part of the problem is particular to CLS, where the act of accumulating, it's not always the best measure. More layout shifts are worse, but it's kind of like an average shift is also important to consider. And we are putting some thought into better measures for renormalization. Patrick,
I know I'm pressed on time, so I want to kind of keep chucking along, but if I hit a time limit, Nick or Yo, just let me know. I'm seeing some improvements in the tooling, and I'm not just trying to plug speed curve here, but this was born out of the fact that our customers were like, well, I got a bad score. What the heck do I do with it? Lighthouse does a good job of listing out the elements that are there. DevTools does a good job of highlighting where those shifts are occurring. I think that we need to see more of this across the board in terms of our tooling, where we can actually highlight where these shifts are occurring. Pat does a great job in web page test of, highlighting the frames and the film strip when they change and showing the cool graph of like where it happens along that, life cycle that was measured. But I think there's opportunity here, because the other thing they're coming to us with is, I have no idea how to fix this or address it. So I'd like to see more of this. I think we're definitely kind of doubling down and trying to look at making this easier for customers. I think others are too, but I do think that the tooling for diagnostics of this is a little bit behind as well.
Yeah, Patrick, you raised your hand.
It was mostly on the CLS issue. I just wanted to mention in the lab versus field discrepancy in Lighthouse specifically. Lighthouse team is reworking major portions to enable post-load measurements. So obviously it's not going to be the same as real user interaction, but if a site owner knows what interactions are typical, relatively soonish, we do hope to be able to enable them to measure that to get a more realistic picture of what it's going to be like once a user actually comes on the page. And we have discussed the problem that you identified, right? That all of these things are called CLS, right? Whether it's 12 hours, whether it's 30 seconds, and how do we handle that? Because especially for our typical users, we're kind of introducing them to this for the very first time. So if there's been any thought about that, how to address the same metric name reporting very different circumstances, advisable.
Yeah. Okay, I think I've belabored that point enough, but I do think there's opportunity there. The good news is that it's starting a conversation again. Benjamin, I agree that I don't know how to fix this is concerning. I think that's something where there's some great posts that talked about some of the biggest things that contribute to CLS. There's some reference posts that we use when we're talking to our customers. We're building up our own knowledge base when we find different use cases and issues that people run into that are causing a bad CLS score. There's some great case studies going on right now in the WebPerf Slack that I think have been great to reference and talk to. But yeah, I do agree that it's a concern that not knowing how to address it and fix it, is a problem. So getting them there with the tools to the point of here's the problem. And quite frankly, layout shifts happen. And a lot of times they're so small, they don't really matter. But, getting them to focus on the largest layout shift, for example, is a starting point, like really kind of directing that, I think is where we have the opportunity. Really quickly, moving on to FID. Everyone's doing so fantastic here. We have no problems with FID whatsoever, it seems like. So this is my biggest complaint with FID, is that I think that first input delay, basically how fast your application is responding to user input, a scroll, click, key press. For me, and what we're seeing with our customers is, and I've shared this with Annie and team as well, that I think the bar is too low. Right now, what we're seeing, the problem might be multifaceted here. I think in general, the bar is too low because we see at the 75th percentile far under 100 milliseconds, so 27 milliseconds. Even at the 95th percentile, 255 milliseconds, where we're telling people, hey, a good number for FID is under 100 milliseconds at P75. Why this is concerning to me is not that we don't want our customers to do well, but if we take something and we say, okay, what are we really trying to get them to do with FID? Is it going after and attacking the long tasks that are the problem, like actually stopping more of the, stop the world execution on the main thread? This isn't helping. So when we look at it and we look at the 75th percentile, in this case for a customer that I just pulled, 19 milliseconds for FID. So they're great at the 75th percentile. However, we're measuring long tasks and looking at the longest task as well. And the 75th percentile for that metric is up to 300 milliseconds. So obviously causing a pretty bad experience, when that's occurring. So this raises a lot of questions because it's like, is this good? Is this bad? What should we be measuring? I like that we're using total blocking time as a proxy in our synthetic data to talk about this, but I fear that we're not shining a big enough spotlight on the real problem around long tasks. And whether that's the bar is too low, or maybe this is another example of an issue with, life cycle of the page measurements, or measuring FID maybe up to onload is maybe not the best because maybe they haven't even interacted with the page at that point. Are we missing some of that? Is that trailing off? I think there's some more work to do here. So
is the longest task also before load?
I believe, I'm sorry, no, you know what? I take that back. For us, it's not, because we're measuring interaction times as well. And those are beacons that we send after the load event. So when a user interacts or scrolls at the page. So for us, it's actually not. However, if they don't interact with the page, obviously we're not going to measure anything there. There's some other caveats there. And I don't know how other tools are necessarily doing it, but for us, we do wait until there is a user interaction before measuring FID. So maybe that's a little bit of a misstatement there. I also think, and I have to I have to apologize to the team because I did see that long task attribution was in 86, I believe, but that was actually something I just learned about today, so I'm behind a bit. But the ability to actually say, hey, what's driving these long tasks? Again, making it actionable, answering that, how do I fix this question? Right now, when we try to compare the two between synthetic data and RUM data, it's sort of hit or miss because a lot of times that execution is coming in from an ad that might have been, or a third party that might have been introduced for that specific thing that we measured on the page, but isn't on 90% of the other pages. It's a little bit hard to sort of tie those two together. So being able to provide that attribution for what's driving those long tasks, so our customers know how to actually go about and fix it, and we can tell them that, I think would be a huge advantage for them with their RUM data in attacking long tasks. It doesn't address the issues I think we see with FID. Honestly, I think it's maybe a discussion of should it just be a higher bar than it is today. Any thoughts on that?
So Patrick will be discussing some thoughts we've put into, well, he's basically done all of the work, not we, sorry, how Lighthouse does long task attribution and how, if possible, we could try to use that in the long tasks API.
Awesome. looking forward to that.
A lot of our team does also think that 100 milliseconds and 75th is not a high enough bar.
Okay. All right.
I mean, at some point, you have to accept that it's responsive, though, right? And it is actually responding to user input, and maybe it's just not a problem in 75% of the cases, right?
Yeah, so maybe the problem is not fit itself, but rather what happens after fit, like actually handling the input is taking too long, or who knows, right? So
There's also users kind of being trained to click late, that they can tell the page is still settling, and so there's kind of multiple problems happening.
Yeah. Sorry, Annie, I missed that last part. If that was a question, I apologize, but I'm going to keep cruising.
No.
Okay, this brings me to my favorite topic over the last 8+ years. This is something I just wanted to sort of raise up, and I know that we've tried in different ways to address how we actually go about measuring and attacking this problem of third-party performance, specifically with display ads. I'm kind of putting this out here more because I had this really enlightening discussion with a customer a few weeks ago. And this has been the number one complaint we see from our media customers. I mean, we love to beat up on them. Everybody that I know, like that does a presentation around third parties, pulls up the CNN.com site and just has at it. But at the same time, I do feel like maybe, and myself included, we haven't really given them or armed them with the tools that they need to actually make this problem less of a problem. Actual quote from a customer, you all can read it there. This is someone that I've been working with across like SOSTA, Akamai, and now SpeedCurve. And he literally, is banging on the table because he doesn't have the ability to get visibility into what's happening within an embedded iframe and the resources that are being shown there. He doesn't have anything to tie into that's more turnkey and out of the box to actually go about measuring, when the ad slots are being rendered to try and improve these things. This is a shameless plug for some of these issues that I know have been raised and talked about, but these issues right here to me have been outstanding for a really long time, specifically, looking at resource timing within those third-party frames or even first-party frames, as well as some of these others that have been raised, how we're kind of ignoring some of the impact of frames on things like CLS. So they're the worst offenders. They're the poorest performing sites. They have the worst scores, but we're still kind of giving them this sort of like empty answer in terms of how we go about, fixing, measuring, addressing ad performance. More of a question for the group. There's probably some things that we could be doing as vendors that we could tie into today, or that people have experimented with. I know New Relic, for example, have been doing some stuff around measuring events that ads are, ad providers are posting back into the page out of the box. So I don't know if there are other best practices we should be latching onto. I do think getting the visibility into resources within iframes, just so they can understand, was it campaign A versus campaign B that I need to turn off because it's so slow, would be a huge improvement with what we're seeing today. Any thoughts or comments on ad performance in general?
As a rum vendor, I will certainly +1 to all that.
Got it.
Just a quick comment from the scheduling side of things. This is something we've been exploring just a little bit over the last, maybe starting the last month or so. I'll talk about in my talk next is that we're seeing a desire from folks, from partners to have some sort of primitives to be able to control what third parties are doing on the main thread, whether it be deprioritizing them or, doing something in order to improve first-party performance. So we're at the very beginning stages of this, but it'd be great to hear, or collaborate on getting metrics. We're kind of like right now just trying to study what pages are doing so we can see where the opportunity is.
Awesome. Yeah, we'd love to work with you on it. And we'd love to, I can give you a lot of different examples and a lot of different, here's what the customer wants to see and here's what we can't show them, if helpful. Yeah, let us know. We'd love to collaborate.
Okay.
Finally, last thing I'll say is on server timing. This is one that, I really love the spec. I love the idea. I love what our ideas were around how we were going to leverage server timing. but as of today, and I just pulled this from the Chrome usage data, we're still under 7% roughly in terms of adoption of server timing. And I'm not a gambling man, but I think if we were to go in here and look at the HTTP archive data, mostly I would guess that a lot of this is coming from Akamai because of the work they've done to expose some of that for their RUM product, for people to get visibility into things like cache hit miss or origin edge latency, things like that. I just feel like it's such a missed opportunity, and I'm kind of coming with a whine and a complaint that has nothing to do with this group necessarily, but it's more of a call to action of are we really taking advantage of this? Like, are we really doing everything we can with server timing? It was introduced. It was great to see Akamai do that. However, Akamai is kind of the only CDN that I know of anyway that's surfacing this for their customers by default with specific CDN specific measurements through server timing. In terms of performance analytics, the tools, SpeedCurve isn't in there yet. Like we're just now getting ready to roll out server timing in our RUM data, but have kind of been waiting for customers to tell us what it is they want to surface. And right now there's just less adoption of it. I believe Web Page Test is surfacing this. They threw this in there because Pat tends to be on top of all this stuff before everybody else is. But are there things that we could be surfacing at the request level even? But to me, this is an underutilized specification, an underutilized tool in the browser, and I don't know what we can do to get more support of it. But I absolutely see a need there to expose different metrics and things that we can't get other than using an APM tool or something that's really more bytecode instrumented or something like that on the server side. So for CDNs, we'd love to see Fastly, Cloudflare, others working alongside Akamai. Imagine that, to be able to actually surface some of this stuff. I think it could be really cool. I think it can be really beneficial to the customer, and we could actually start to improve things that are happening with time to first byte if we were able to surface some of that. And I'm sure there's a host of other areas where we could use this and adopt it, but so far haven't really been seeing a ton of that. Those were the things I wanted to hit on. I know I went over time and I kind of blubbed there at the beginning with getting started, so I appreciate everybody's patience. Again, thanks for all the awesome work this group's been doing. Really enjoy working with you all and kind of making a lot of progress on this stuff. Web Vitals has, again, just been awesome from our perspective and just starting the conversation, and obviously a lot more work that we want to do to continue to make that better. So any other thoughts or questions? I know I'm over time.
Cliff, the only other question I had for you, just about like some of these new Web Vitals metrics that you're measuring for your customers as well, besides the external pressures to look at these metrics, have your customers reported use? Like, have they reported good or bad things about wanting to measure them at all? Just, like, does it correlate with their business metrics or bounce rates or stuff like that? Have you gotten much feedback yet?
Yeah, we have, and I love the data that you showed as well when you wrote your post on this. We've gotten mixed reviews where we have seen really strong correlations with things like FID, and we've seen strong correlations with LCP. Maybe not as strong correlations with CLS, and that's just in terms of bounce rate, conversion rate, things like that. Customers are excited about it more for the fact that they've known there was a problem and they haven't liked how the pages felt, for lack of a better term, specifically with like CLS. So the fact that they can actually now like pinpoint it and find an issue and fix it, I think they're delighted. So I think it's been really good to see. I guess I'd like to collect more data and see, to decide whether or not the verdict's still out on some of these things, whether there's an impact on longer term conversion rates and things like that. But right now, I think initially positive and definitely see a strong correlation. Well, like we do with all of our performance metrics, to be honest, but really stronger correlations with things that are really frustrating users, like long tasks and input delay and things like that. Cool. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you, Cliff.
Thanks.
So we had scheduled a break, 15-minute or so break. Do you want to we should probably still do that.
Yeah, we should. Can we turn that into 10 minutes just to recoup some of the time? Would that work for folks? I see nods. So
Sounds good.
Let's do 10 minutes and reconvene in something 53, depending on your time zone.
Thanks.
Cheers.